You should do it.
Okay.
Hi guys, we're Team Lifelike. We are a senior capstone group in the game design program. And we're here today to tell you about our game, Lifelike. We're actually going to be doing a pre-mortem presentation, which is kind of weird. Typically, when you make a game afterwards, you do something called a post-mortem, where you kind of reflect on everything you did. Here, we're kind of doing that before it's done.
Yeah, so our game is our capstone project, our senior capstone project. So we're not quite finished yet, but we still have some cool stuff to show you guys. So we're going to start with some the personal introductions of our team. So I'm Rob Beecher. I'm the producer, narrative, and game designer, and writer for the project.
And I'm Kiril. I'm the lead programmer and part designer and also the technical artist.
I'm Paul Mary. I do a lot of the design of the game itself and a lot of the programming to help Kiril out.
And our artist isn't here today because she's several thousand miles away, but you'll get to see a lot of her work anyway. So let's start with what is Lifelike? Lifelike is the name of our game. Lifelike is a modern, mundane, fantasy, tactical, role-playing, corporate ladder climbing simulator, which means almost nothing. So we're going to get into a little more details.
I want to talk to you guys about our goals coming into this project. The first is we wanted to make a very strategic game. The second is we wanted to have a lot of what is called roguelike elements. I'll talk to you guys about that a little later on. We wanted a really unique setting. We went with an office. We wanted really, really fast gameplay. We wanted an entertaining and unintrusive narrative. And lastly, we just wanted our game to not be terrible. So here are a couple of inspirations. I'm not sure if you guys will be familiar with them, but Final Fantasy Tactics, Fire Emblem, and Dungeons of Dreadmore are all kind of strategy turn-based games. One thing all of these have in common is they're very set in a fantasy-style environment. Ours is not like that. Ours is an office.
So the first thing we want to tackle is the problem with narrative with this sort of tactical game in general. This is an example from Fire Emblem. The biggest issue with this sort of game is that the narrative and the gameplay are almost always completely separate from each other. In that you see these text bubbles that you just have to progress through, and you can't do anything else until you've progressed. You read them, then you see there's these different versions of the characters. You've got these detailed characters while they're saying things, then you have these completely different, lower detailed characters in the actual gameplay. And we really wanted to avoid that and wanted to make the narrative and the gameplay feel like they belong together rather than they just kind of had a sort of back and forth relationship like they do in most games of this genre.
We built our game kind of on a familiar foundation. And what we mean is we took a lot of things a lot of gamers are familiar with and tried to innovate from there out. The base of our game isn't very innovative, but we think a lot of our storytelling, our setting, and some of the emergent gameplay patterns are.
So yeah, we touched on this a little bit, but we really wanted to create a unique setting for our game because most of these games take place in either like very sci-fi or very fantasy setting, and we wanted to kind of do a weird thing where it's this modern, really initially boring, mundane setting of this office building, and yet it gets a lot weirder, and the whole theme of the game is that it starts as this very boring office, but the further up you go, the more literal, fantasy, occult, weird things start showing up in a sort of nonchalant way. So one of the main ways we're doing that is through this environmental progression, which is a lot of work for our artists. But basically, the way set pieces are placed in our levels are procedural in a way, in that we pick a set piece, so we say, hey, we want a desk here. But based on the floor level, it determines the level of corruption within that floor, which determines which version of the desk it'll use. So it starts out as a normal desk, and then you start to get these weird things like these little ceremonial daggers and runes on the papers, and the top turns into a stone tablet, and you've got scrolls, and then it turns into completely just this like sacrificial altar at the end. So it keeps the theme and the setting together while showing this progression.
One thing we're focusing on, and I just wanted to talk about this because I realized most people wouldn't be familiar with it, is basically you get a lot of characters as you play through the game, and these characters have different strengths and weaknesses and abilities, and a lot of the fun gameplay is using their abilities in sync and together and coming up with kind of different patterns you can do with them.
So you want to take this one?
Sure. So developing gameplay and narrative together, what we did when we were developing characters is we kind of designed their skill set and their certain magic stuff they can do in together with their narrative, which kind of leads to characters being able to do what you think they would do, which is actually pretty good when players are playing the game.
Yeah, so for example, this character that can do this powerful blastic magic that gets stronger when you're next to allies is the human resources coordinator.
He's also an alien. So really quickly, a roguelike comes from the game Rogue, which I think was made in the 80s. The basics behind a game being described as a roguelike features a couple of usual things. The first is permadeath, meaning when your character dies, the game is over. You have to start the game again. And the second is it features a lot of what is called procedural content generation, which is levels and enemies created via code rather than a hand-designed thing. So you'll see every time you play, the game is different because of the randomness. We're going to be implementing both of those in our game, and we think it'll add a lot to the end product.
The permadeath specifically really aids the feeling of connection to a character, because if they die, they're gone. You don't just get to load an earlier save. So one of the big things we want is an interesting cast of characters. So we won't get into too much detail, but these are some of the characters that we're doing. I don't think we really have time to talk about our favorites, so we'll move on. But we really wanted to do really interesting characters, and we put a lot of work into really hand designing each of them. So our biggest thing is unintrusive narrative, and we really just wanted the narrative to not be separate. So we want it to be happening at the same time. So all of the narrative does not impede gameplay, does not stop you from playing, is completely optional. We have dialogue, we have conversations, we have lore documents that you can read if you choose to. This is an example of our dialogue system in that there are conversations that can happen with any combination of characters that are present, in that it picks a random option from each step of the conversation and moves on to the next one. So every character has a place in that conversation, whether they're there or not, and it picks it, and so it's different every time, but serves the same purpose. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you, guys.